How does a golden Hollywood family, bathed in legacy, power, and admiration, end in bloodshed, betrayal, and handcuffs? This isn't a scandal. It's a reckoning. And it has a last name. Reiner. Rob Reiner. You know the name. He made you laugh and all in the family. He made you cry and Stand By Me. He gave you iconic courtroom drama in A Few Good Men. He was Hollywood royalty, liberal icon, respected director, devoted husband, proud father. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Or so it seemed, until one gruesome Sunday afternoon in Brentwood, when everything changed. 2 bodies, dozens of stab wounds, one shattered legacy, and a suspect who shares their blood. But here's the twist. It wasn't just the troubled son, because just 48 hours later, another name from the Reiner family was slapped across headlines, handcuffed, and dragged into the fire. Tracy Reiner, daughter, actress, now charged as an accomplice. Yes, you heard that right. The daughter of Penny Marshall, the niece of Gary Marshall, the adopted child of Rob Reiner, the woman who once graced red carpets and shared laughs with Tom Hanks on the set of A League of Their Own, is now entangled in one of the most horrifying crimes ever to rattle the Hollywood elite. So how did we get here? How did a family who defined storytelling become the headline of a real-life nightmare? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, what were they hiding? Because, trust me, this wasn't a sudden snap. It was a slow collapse. And the warning signs were there. In journals, in emails, in whispered phone calls, and sealed psychiatric records. The kind of secrets that don't just get buried. They get passed down. This story isn't just about murder. It's about the rot beneath the red carpet. It's about what happens when image becomes more important than truth. And it's about what one family was willing to do to each other to protect their version of the story. Now, let's be clear. Nick Reiner, Rob's youngest son, didn't exactly have the cleanest past. A history of addiction, violence, rehab. But nobody expected this. Until that quiet Sunday, in the hills of West LA, when police were called to a Brentwood mansion after neighbors heard screams. Inside, Rob and Michelle Reiner, dead, multiple stab wounds, signs of a struggle. And no sign of their son. For hours, the media danced around it. Unidentified suspect, domestic dispute, possible burglary gone wrong. But detectives already had a name. And it wasn't long before they had the man himself. Nick Reiner, 32, arrested in a public park near USC, sitting alone on a bench, calm, silent. But here's the part the media didn't run with right away. The part that started whispers in Hollywood power circles. Nick wasn't alone in this. Because the LAPD was already chasing a second thread, a paper trail, a digital trail, and eventually a plane ticket, booked in Tracy Reiner's name. She was heading to Germany. Last minute. One way. No press release. No goodbye. But the LAPD caught her first. And that's when it all unraveled. Because Tracy, it turns out, wasn't just the grieving daughter. She was part of something. And when investigators searched her apartment, they found notes, emails, financial transfers, and a USB drive that would blow the case wide open. Now the world is asking, was Tracy a pawn in her brother's unraveling? Or was she pulling the strings? Was this a family drowning in love and desperation? Or a house of secrets ready to explode? And most disturbing of all, did they all see it coming? Here's what we know. Rob and Michelle had grown increasingly distant from Nick in recent months. Friends say Nick had started making weird claims about being erased by his family. There were late-night arguments, security upgrades to the Brentwood home, and whispers, dark whispers, about what happened during Nick's last stint in rehab. One therapist's note described latent homicidal ideation. Another flagged possible sibling codependency with elements of manipulation. But nothing was done. Because in Hollywood, as we'll soon discover, image is everything. You smile for the cameras. You make your campaign donations. You walk the red carpet and wave. And behind closed doors you bleed. This story isn't over. Not by a long shot. Because if you think it ends with a murder charge and a courtroom verdict, think again. This rabbit hole runs deep. From family betrayals, to financial manipulation, to sealed psychiatric evaluations. What was uncovered during the investigation turned a simple homicide into a full-blown exposé. And what Tracy said in her first court appearance. Let's just say, It changed everything. But we'll get there. Because this is not just a crime story. It's a Hollywood tragedy. The kind that doesn't fade away. The kind that gets whispered about at studio parties. The kind that leaves behind a stain. And somewhere, behind the chaos, the headlines, and the horror, there's a final twist still waiting to be revealed. So stay with me. Because next, we go back to where it all began. To the smiling family portraits. The movie premieres. The glittering legacy. And the first cracks in the Reiner empire. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. How do you go from red carpets and roaring applause to yellow crime scene tape and handcuffs? Let's rewind. Before the screaming, before the bodies, before the trial, the press, the secrets, there was a family that looked, on the outside, like the embodiment of Hollywood success. The Reiners weren't just another famous family. They were the family. Smart, talented, influential, loved. Rob Reiner was the smiling face of liberal Hollywood, son of legendary comedian Carl Reiner, husband to Michelle, father to Nick and Tracy, a man who built his career on empathy, intelligence, and heart. You grew up watching his work. Maybe you laugh with this as Spinal Tap. Maybe you fell in love during When Harry Met Sally. Or maybe you teared up at Stand By Me, and then saluted A Few Good Men. He was part of the cultural fabric, a storyteller, a moral voice. And if you only saw the highlight reel, you'd think, that's the life, that's the family, that's the dream. But dreams have shadows. And this dream was hiding something. Let's talk about Tracy. Born Tracy Henry, she was adopted by Rob after he married her mother, the iconic Penny Marshall. Yes, that Penny Marshall. Laverne from Laverne and Shirley, director of Big, one of the few female powerhouses in a man's industry. Tracy had Hollywood royalty on both sides. She grew up around Spielberg, Hanks, DeVito. She wasn't just in Hollywood. She was Hollywood. She starred in A League of Their Own. Small roles, sure. But she was there, in the inner circle, smiling, poised, charming. And then came Nick, Rob's youngest, the biological son, the one who always seemed a little lost. They said he had his father's eyes and his mother's smile. But behind them, a storm. Nick was smart, sensitive, but he didn't fit in. While Tracy flourished in film sets and social scenes, Nick was the kid who struggled with expectations. Too much fame, too many comparisons, too many shadows to stand in. And so he drifted. By 16, he was using. By 18, he'd been in rehab twice. By 21, he'd disappeared from public view entirely. But Rob never gave up. He used his influence to get Nick into top treatment centers. He spoke about addiction publicly. He funded programs. He wrote op-eds about the opioid crisis, always with the tone of a man trying to save his son and make it mean something. But what no one saw, at least not yet, was how deeply fractured the Reiner family had become. You see, the public image was polished. The family interviews? Always upbeat. The red carpet photos? Smiling, united. But behind the scenes, there were locked doors, therapy sessions, legal guardianship talks, and, according to later court records, fear. Michelle, the matriarch, was said to be the glue. Quiet, composed, creative, a photographer, a producer, a humanitarian. She kept things moving, kept the peace. But even glue can crack under pressure, especially when the walls are closing in. So what went wrong? Some say it started years ago, when Nick was just a teen. He began writing dark, angry fiction, pages and pages of pain, stories about betrayal, families that lied, mothers who watched, fathers who judged. He said it was fiction. But was it? Tracy, meanwhile, kept a careful distance. She stayed close to Rob, but didn't live in the main family home. She was polite at press events, warm at award shows. But in private, she allegedly warned friends that Nick scares me sometimes. Still, she was fiercely protective. And that, investigators would later say, may have been her fatal flaw. Because sometimes protecting someone means enabling them. Sometimes love becomes complicity. And as the years went by, the cracks deepened. Nick would go missing for days. Michelle would cancel photo shoots last minute. Rob, usually articulate and confident, began dodging personal questions in interviews. Something was building. And it wasn't just tension. It was inevitability. But no one wanted to face it. Because in Hollywood, perception is reality. And reality? Reality was darker than anyone wanted to admit. So they buried it. With charity galas, with red carpet smiles, with hopeful statements like, "Nick's doing great now." But inside that Brentwood home, behind the gates, beneath the surface, there was silence. And silence, as we've learned time and time again, is dangerous, especially when it replaces truth. Now let's be fair. Every family has issues, even the famous ones, maybe especially the famous ones. But the Reiner family wasn't just dealing with addiction, or fame, or generational pressure. They were, allegedly, dealing with denial, with secrets, with something deeper. And that something had a timeline. Because according to court records later made public, Michelle had started seeing a therapist alone, and in those sessions, she expressed fear. Fear of Nick, fear of what he might do, fear of losing control, fear of losing the family. One journal entry read, "Tracy doesn't see it. Rob won't act. I feel like I'm watching us all walk toward a cliff." That was 3 months before her death. So where was Tracy? Still working behind the scenes, still doing small roles, still visiting her parents. Though less often, according to house staff. And Nick? In and out. Sometimes gone for weeks. Sometimes living in the guest house. Sometimes sleeping in the main house. But always unstable. One neighbor reported loud arguments. Another said they saw broken furniture being removed. Still, no police reports. No intervention. No consequences. Because when your last name is Reiner, things get handled quietly. Until they don't. Because that Sunday afternoon, the quiet ended. And everything exploded. But before we go there, we need to go deeper. Because the signs were there. In family photos that no longer showed Nick. In emails between Michelle and a friend saying, "I don't feel safe in my own home." In a private security contract for internal monitoring quietly signed by Rob 3 months before the murders. There were attempts to fix it, to contain it, to manage the chaos behind closed doors. But some things can't be managed. And when truth is ignored long enough, it becomes dangerous. And in this case, it became deadly. But what came next would make the murders look like just the beginning. What happens when the child you're trying to save becomes the person you're most afraid of? That was the unspoken question hanging over the Reiner household for years. And the answer? It didn't come with rehab, or therapy, or love. It came with blood. But long before that horrifying Sunday afternoon in Brentwood, the spiral had already begun. Let's go back. Nick Reiner wasn't born broken. Far from it. He was the golden boy. Bright, curious, sensitive, a child who loved books, who could quote movies word for word, who once told his dad he wanted to write something that made people cry and think at the same time. But sensitivity, when left unprotected, can curdle, especially under the spotlight, especially when you're born into a dynasty. Nick never chose the stage, but it surrounded him. Playdates with other celebrity kids, paparazzi flashes, expectations that felt like lead weights on a child's shoulders. He wasn't a prodigy. He wasn't an actor. He didn't want to perform. He wanted space, stillness, an identity of his own. But in a family like the Reiners, there's little room for anonymity. So Nick disappeared, emotionally, before he ever physically did. At 13, he started skipping school. At 14, he was caught stealing alcohol from a set trailer. At 15, he had his first overdose. It was a cocktail of benzos and painkillers. Not enough to kill, but enough to terrify. Rob went public. He didn't hide it. He gave interviews about the opioid crisis. He cried on talk shows. He urged Congress to act. To the world, he was a brave father being open about addiction. But at home, Nick reportedly called those interviews performative bulls **T. He accused his father of using his pain to look heroic, of making himself the victim. Whether true or not, those accusations cut deep. Because by the time Nick turned 18, he had a record. Possession, assault, later dropped, trespassing, each charge sealed. Each situation handled quietly. Tracy tried to help. She checked him into rehab in Arizona. She flew out to visit. But according to leaked text messages found later, Nick saw her as fake, as a puppet for dad. He wrote in one message, "They don't want me better. They want me quiet." Let that sink in. Not healed, not healthy, just silent. It's the kind of statement that festers, that turns pain into rage. And rage? Rage finds a way to erupt. At 21, Nick vanished for 6 months. No contact, no sightings, no credit card usage. The Reiners reportedly hired private investigators. A family friend leaked that Rob was inconsolable. Michelle was said to be sleeping with the lights on. When Nick reappeared, it was at an ER in New Mexico. Starved, shaking, delirious. He claimed to have been living in the woods. No ID, no story, just scars. They took him back in. What else could they do? He was their son, but he wasn't the same. He stopped speaking at dinner. He would pace the hallways at night. He'd stare at walls for hours. One former housekeeper, speaking anonymously, said, "It was like something had taken root in him. Something angry. He was still Nick, but not really. And that's the most terrifying kind of transformation. The one you can't see clearly until it's too late." Rob built a guest house on the property for Nick to have space. But also, so the main house could be locked. Tracy stopped visiting. She said it was to give them time as a family. But privately, a friend claimed she told them, "I can't look at him without feeling like something bad is going to happen." Still, the family soldiered on. Because when you're that famous, when the cameras are always watching, collapse has to be hidden. They showed up to charity events. They smiled at film festivals. They tweeted political outrage and support. All while, behind the gates of that Brentwood mansion, a storm kept building. And then came 2018. Nick was arrested outside a downtown bar after reportedly shoving a woman. Charges were dropped. No one talked about it. But something in him snapped after that. He started writing again. Hundreds of pages. Scattered journals. Typed manifestos. Dark fiction. Except some of it wasn't fiction. He wrote about a family with secrets. About a father who lied to the world. A mother who watched and did nothing. A sister who played nice and manipulated behind the scenes. They were stories. But they weren't. In one particularly chilling entry, later recovered during the investigation, he wrote, "They think I'm their failure. I think they're my origin story." Another, "I don't hate them. I just don't believe in their version of love anymore." What do you even do with writing like that? If you're Rob Reiner, apparently, you do what you've always done. You try to control the narrative. In early 2019, Rob began pushing a documentary about mental health. A passion project, he said, inspired by family experience. But Nick was nowhere in the credits, nowhere in the promos, nowhere at the premiere. Because according to reports, he was banned from the theater. Michelle, reportedly, begged Rob not to provoke him. But Rob believed in exposure, in sunlight, in storytelling. He just didn't realize. Nick had his own story to tell, and it wasn't going to be shared on a screen. It would be told in blood. Because just a year later, everything cracked. One night, a neighbor reported hearing glass shatter, then yelling, then silence. No one called the cops. Why would they? It's Brentwood. It's the Reiners. 2 weeks later, Michelle canceled a major charity event. No explanation, just a family emergency. Behind the scenes, therapists were being consulted. Lawyers too. One insider claims Rob was considering legal conservatorship. Another says Tracy had begun contacting friends about leaving LA for a while. Whatever was happening, it was accelerating. And Nick was spiraling. He stopped shaving, stopped leaving the guest house, wrote obsessively, recorded voice memos to himself. Dozens of them. Like this one. "I think I'm invisible. And I think they like it that way. But ghosts get angry. And when they do, people listen." It was no longer a downward spiral. It was free fall. And no one stopped it. Maybe because they didn't know how. Maybe because they were afraid. Or maybe because they thought they still had time. But they didn't. Because on a sunny Sunday afternoon in 2025, that spiral hit the ground. And everything the Reiner family tried to bury came violently, publicly, horrifyingly undone. But what the police found inside Nick's room, that would take this story to a whole new level. What do you do when you're the one who held the family together for decades, and now, the thing you fear most is living under your roof? Michelle Reiner was not a woman who crumbled easily. She wasn't loud like Rob. Wasn't flashy like Hollywood. She was the quiet strength, the one who always kept her feet firmly on the ground while everyone else reached for the stars. Photographer, producer, mother. She loved fiercely, but love, when it's weaponized by fear, can become something else entirely, something dangerous. And long before that brutal Sunday afternoon in Brentwood, Michelle knew. She didn't just suspect. She knew something was coming, something violent. And yet, she stayed. Why? To protect her family? Or because she believed, truly believed, she could still save him? That was the question investigators kept circling back to. Because when they cracked open the locked drawer of her bedroom nightstand, they didn't just find medication bottles and a sleep mask. They found pages, dozens of them, handwritten, undated, private. Some were letters, some were diary entries, some were never meant to be read by anyone, until now. And what they revealed was a woman slowly unraveling under the weight of maternal terror. Let's go back. Michelle first met Rob in the 1980s, long before his name became synonymous with Oscar buzz. She saw the man, not the myth. They fell in love the quiet way. No paparazzi chase. No whirlwind scandal. Just two creative souls trying to build something real. Together, they adopted Tracy. Later, Nick was born, and Michelle, by all accounts, devoted herself to her children. She was the steady one, the safe place, the calm voice in the storm. But even anchors break when the waves keep rising. The earliest diary entry investigators reviewed was dated roughly 12 years before the murders. It read simply, "Nick is slipping again. I don't know how to reach him. He scares me sometimes." It was just one line, but it echoed loudly, because as the years passed, those one-liners turned into paragraphs, and the paragraphs into pages. One page read, "Last night he stood at the edge of our bed. Just stood there. I pretended to be asleep. I think he knew." Another, "Tracy says I'm overreacting, but she doesn't live here. She doesn't see the way he watches me." And then, this one, "Rob still believes this is just another relapse. He won't admit Nick is different now. I can't convince him. We're running out of time." It was dated 6 weeks before she died. By then, Michelle had stopped keeping the diary in a journal. She scattered the pages, hid them in books, some behind photos, one tucked inside a hollowed-out parenting manual, almost like she wanted them found, but not too soon. Why? Maybe she didn't want to betray her son. Maybe she feared what Rob would do. Or maybe she just wanted someone to understand the full story after it was all over. Because Michelle, despite the fear, never stopped being a mother. She cooked Nick's favorite meals. She left notes on his door. She reminded him to take his medication. She covered for him when he lashed out at the staff. In fact, one employee later told investigators, "She once told me, he's not a monster. He's just broken. You don't throw away broken things." But what happens when the broken thing starts breaking you? Michelle wasn't just afraid of Nick's instability. She was afraid of his rage. In one heartbreaking letter never sent, addressed to Tracy, she wrote, "There's a darkness in him, sweetheart. And sometimes I think he feeds on the fact that we don't name it. I'm scared what might happen if it's left unspoken too long." Tracy never received that letter, but she had her own version of events. She told friends her mother was paranoid, that she was making Nick out to be something he wasn't, that Mom always exaggerates when she's stressed. It wasn't malicious. It was denial. Tracy couldn't face the reality her mother was hinting at. Because if Michelle was right, then Tracy's world, her foundation, was already crumbling. And Tracy? She needed to believe it could still be fixed. But Michelle had stopped believing. Instead, she started preparing. She installed a new lock on the master bedroom door. She began carrying pepper spray. She stopped sleeping through the night. One email to a close friend read, "I sleep in 2-hour cycles now. I keep waking up when I hear him pacing. The 4 creaks just outside the door. I count the steps. Always the same. 8 to the left, 8 back, over and over, like a predator." That's not just maternal worry. That's fear. Survival-level fear. And yet, no restraining order. No removal. No arrest. Because she loved him. And because, in her own words, "I don't want my last act as his mother to be locking him away." It's gut-wrenching. Because we know how this story ends. But Michelle didn't. Not yet. She still believed she could change it. That belief drove her to schedule an emergency intervention. Court records show that she'd booked a private psychiatric evaluation for Nick. The date? The day she was murdered. She was going to have him committed, privately, humanely. It was a last-ditch effort to save her son and herself. But she never got the chance. The paperwork was on her desk, and signed, stained with blood. It's possible Nick found it. Possible he knew what was coming. Or maybe he didn't care. Maybe, by that point, he'd already decided how the story would end. But here's the part that chills to the bone. In the final diary page recovered, torn, crumpled, found inside a shoe box, Michelle wrote, "If anything happens to me, Don't let Tracy blame herself. She loves him too. That was always the problem. We all loved him too much to see the truth. That's not just heartbreak. That's premonition. That's a woman writing her own obituary with a shaking hand. And yet she stayed. Because that's what mothers do. Even when it kills them. Even when they know the knife is coming. But what Tracy said after the murder, that would ignite a whole new firestorm. Because she wasn't just grieving. She was hiding something. And when investigators found the text messages between her and Nick, everything cracked wide open. It started with silence. Then the dog began barking, nonstop. Next came the scream. Not a startled yelp. Not an argument. Not a fall. A scream of the kind you don't forget. The kind that sounds like something primal has been ripped out of a person. That was what a neighbor later told police. One scream. Then quiet. It was just after 2:45 p.m., a calm Sunday in Brentwood. Sunlight casting perfect shadows across the manicured lawns of millionaires. Laughter from a nearby pool party. Sprinklers ticking in rhythm. But inside the Reiner mansion at the top of the hill, something horrific had just happened. It took another hour before anyone acted. A housekeeper, returning from her lunch break, found the front door ajar. She called out. No answer. She stepped inside. The air, she would later say, felt wrong. Heavy. Still. Like a room that had just finished screaming. She called Michelle's name. Then Rob's. Still silence. She made it 10 feet into the hallway before she saw the blood. It was pooled. Thick. Already darkening. She didn't go any farther. She ran back outside, trembling hands dialing 911. The dispatcher's call log was chilling. Caller reports, blood everywhere. Believes occupants may be injured or dead. By the time officers arrived, the dog was howling. Unfed, locked in the den. The front door? Still ajar. No sign of forced entry. The foyer? Pristine. No signs of a struggle. But the trail of blood? It led inward. The first body was Rob's. Face down. Collapsed at the base of the staircase. Multiple stab wounds across the back, neck, and side. It wasn't quick. And it wasn't clean. The second body was in the kitchen. Michelle. Her hands were raised. Defensive wounds slashed across her palms and forearms. She had fought. Fought hard. The knife, a long, stainless steel carving blade, was found in the sink. No fingerprints. Just blood. Both victims were pronounced dead at the scene. The responding officers secured the perimeter. Brentwood doesn't see this kind of violence. Especially not in this home. Rob Reiner? Dead. It didn't compute. But the evidence was undeniable. 2 lives extinguished. One question hanging in the air. Where was Nick? And the answer came faster than anyone expected. The guest house was unlocked. Inside, investigators found his phone, his wallet, a half-eaten sandwich, a USB drive plugged into a laptop still playing ambient music. The laptop screen showed a single file name. Redemption. More on that later. In the main house, things got stranger. There was no sign of a break-in. No overturned furniture. No broken windows. No missing valuables. This wasn't a robbery. It wasn't random. It was intimate. Personal. There were only 3 people known to be in the house that afternoon. Rob, Michelle, and Nick. The housekeeper had clocked out at noon. Security footage showed her leaving. The rest of the day? A mystery. Until the police reviewed the internal surveillance system. Rob had installed it years ago, private use only. No cloud storage. Local hard drives. One backup in the panic room. What investigators saw on the recovered footage was chilling. At 1:38 p.m., Rob and Michelle were in the kitchen. They were making tea, talking quietly, calm. Then, Nick walks in. His body language was tense, shoulders stiff, jaw tight. There was no audio. But you can read it in their faces. Michelle says something. Nick flinches. Rob steps forward. Nick steps back. Then Rob raises his hand, not in anger, just a gesture. And Nick snaps. He lunges. The footage cuts out at that moment. Why? The recording hard drive was unplugged, manually, just seconds after the attack began. By who? You can guess. But it was too late. Because the system had already stored a backup of that moment. Enough to identify Nick as the attacker. A manhunt began immediately. Helicopters. Patrol cars. Alerts across LA. But Nick didn't run far. He was found hours later, sitting calmly on a bench in a downtown park near USC. No blood on his clothes. No visible injuries. Just a blank stare. When officers approached, He didn't resist. He looked up and reportedly said, "I thought you'd come sooner." That was it. No tears. No anger. No explanation. He was arrested without incident. But the true mystery wasn't just Nick's whereabouts. It was what came next. Because when detectives began processing the Reiner home, they made their way to the upstairs hallway. That's when they noticed something odd. A candle, lit, unburned, sitting at the end of the hallway, outside the study, and next to it, a folded note. 2 words scrawled in black ink. "I'm sorry." It wasn't signed, but it was written in Nick's handwriting. Inside the study was even more disturbing. A journal, hundreds of pages, titled "Truth Before Silence," filled with cryptic entries. Angry, rambling, obsessive. Some pages were just repeated phrases. She watched and did nothing. He lied and the world applauded. "They made me. They made me. They made me." And at the back of the journal, a timeline, events, dates, names. Nick had cataloged years of perceived slights, real or imagined, from both Rob and Michelle. And Tracy, especially Tracy. One note read, "She knew everything. She always knew, and still played innocent." This wasn't just a murder. This was an explosion, the culmination of years of rage, paranoia, and obsession. But what broke the case wide open wasn't just the journal. It was what they found on the USB drive. That file, Redemption, a 47-minute audio recording. Nick's voice, calm, clear, lucid. A confession? Not quite. More like a manifesto. He spoke about betrayal, about abandonment, about being a ghost in his own family. But he also said something else, something that shocked investigators. "I'm not the only one who deserves to go down. She helped. She knew. She set it up." Who? He didn't say, but the next line clarified everything. "Tracy, if you're listening, I hope it was worth it." Investigators froze. Tracy? She wasn't even in LA that day. Or was she? Flight records showed something interesting. 2 days before the murder, Tracy had flown in from New York. No public appearances. No announcements. Just a quiet trip. Her return flight? Booked for the night after the murders. But it was canceled. Why? Because she had rebooked a one-way ticket to Germany, set to depart the next morning. Now the questions piled up fast. Why was she in town? Why didn't she tell anyone? And why the sudden attempt to leave the country after her parents were killed? The LAPD placed her on a watch list. And just hours before boarding, she was taken into custody at LAX. Detained. Silent. But her phone? That wasn't silent. And when they checked her messages, they found conversations between her and Nick. Dozens of them. Encrypted. Coded. But some, clear as day. One, dated 2 days before the murders, read, "If you do this, make sure the knife gets cleaned. I can't help you if they find blood on it." That was enough. Enough to charge. Enough to destroy what little was left of the Reiner legacy. The public still doesn't know half of what was in those messages. But one thing was certain. This wasn't just Nick's crime. It was something deeper, darker, more entangled. And Tracy? She had just become a suspect. But what happened during her first police interview? That would make the walls shake. Because when Tracy finally opened her mouth, she didn't plead the fifth. She didn't cry. She didn't deny. She said 5 words that changed everything. Check the hard drive. Now, what kind of killer leaves behind a USB drive? What kind of sister tells detectives to check her brother's hard drive? We're no longer in the realm of impulsive violence. This wasn't rage. This was something else. Something calculated. And the proof was hiding in plain sight. In Nick Reiner's bedroom. Let's rewind a little. After Tracy Reiner whispered those 5 words, "Check the hard drive." Now, detectives paused. She didn't ask for a lawyer. She didn't ask for water. She didn't even ask what she was being charged with. She just leaned forward, stared the lead detective in the eye, and said, "You're looking in the wrong room." Not a denial. Not an excuse. Just a chilling hint. That's when the search warrant for Nick's room was expanded. The LAPD returned to the Brentwood home with fresh orders. They'd already combed the obvious. The laptop on his desk. The bloodstained journal in the guest house. The USB labeled Redemption. But now, they dug deeper. And what they found changed everything. First, the closet. Beneath piles of worn hoodies and blankets, they discovered a metal lockbox. Inside, a secondary phone, burner style, loaded with encrypted messaging apps. Photos, some printed, some digital. of Rob and Michelle at various events, circled in red marker. Handwritten notes tracking their daily schedules. Maps of the neighborhood, escape routes marked. This wasn't spur of the moment. This was premeditated, staged, cold. And then, there was the box of receipts. Hardware stores. Knife sharpeners. A small electronics shop in Koreatown. All dated within the last 2 months. Among the receipts was one that stood out. Custom hard drive, 2 terabytes, encrypted partition, client, Tracy Reiner. The detectives knew what they were looking for now. They turned the room upside down. Mattress flipped. Baseboards checked. Bookshelves dismantled. Nothing. Then one officer noticed something odd about the floorboard under Nick's desk chair. It creaked, but not the way wood usually creaks. It was hollow. They pried it open. Beneath, wrapped in plastic and duct tape, was a black, heat-resistant drive. No label. No casing. Just wires, ports, and secrets. They rushed it to the tech forensics team. It took 12 hours to bypass the encryption. What they found made the lead investigator vomit. Because this hard drive? It was a diary, a confession, a vault of digital madness. Hours of voice memos, hundreds of documents, photos, screenshots of family texts, emails never sent, video clips secretly recorded throughout the house. Let's start with the videos. Most were boring. Footage from hidden nanny cams Nick had set up. Some inside the kitchen, some near the living room. One, shockingly, inside his mother's bedroom. Creepy? Yes, but not illegal. Until they found the video. Time-stamped. 3 nights before the murders. It showed Rob and Michelle seated at the dining table. Michelle was holding a folder. Rob looked stressed, agitated. Michelle says, clearly, "We have to do something. I don't want to wait another week." Rob replies, "We will. But we're doing this the right way. He needs help, not a prison cell." Then, Michelle lifts a paper and says, "I've signed it. I'll take him in myself if I have to." She was referring to the commitment form. The one that was found and signed on her desk after her death. In the background of the video, barely visible, was a reflection in a mirror. Nick, filming from the hallway. He had heard everything. He knew what they were planning, and he didn't wait for it to happen. Then came the voice memos. One began, "They're going to lock me away. Like a dog. Like trash. I was their mistake, and they want to bury it now. But I won't let them." Another, "Tracy plays innocent, but she's known for years. She covered for me. She paid off the bartender. She paid for the second abortion. She knew. Abortion? That wasn't in any of the court filings. That wasn't public. That wasn't even suspected. But it was in the voice memos. In explicit, vengeful detail. Nick accused Tracy of paying off a woman to keep quiet. Of using her Hollywood connections to suppress a scandal. The tech team confirmed. Some of the encrypted texts between Nick and Tracy lined up with these claims. Not all, but enough. Enough to show Tracy was deeply involved in something more than just a sibling bond. She wasn't innocent. At best, she was complicit. At worst, she was a co-conspirator. Then came the files. In a folder titled Moments Before, Nick had saved screenshots of the murder plan. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment rampage. He'd created a checklist. Steps before freedom. Cut cameras. Remove phone battery. Lure them into separate rooms. Use the carving knife. No prints. Don't panic. Leave note. Walk away. Chilling. Efficient. Soulless. But the most disturbing file? A letter. Unsent. Titled, "To Tracy, read this when I'm gone." It read, "You helped create this. You fed it. You laughed with them when I cried. You cleaned up my messes, then told them how good you were for doing it. You think you're a hero? You're just like them. But don't worry. I'm leaving the truth behind. You'll pay too. In the only way that matters to people like us. Publicly. They built an empire. I burned it. Now you can stand in the ashes and decide. Do you tell the world the truth? Or do you keep lying like we were trained to?" Investigators were stunned. The manifesto. The hard drive. The footage. The receipts. It wasn't just a murder case anymore. It was a full-blown psychological war within a family that made a living telling other people's stories. And now their story was unraveling faster than anyone imagined. But Tracy, now officially named a co-conspirator, had one more card to play. Because when they asked her, "Did you know he was going to kill them?" she shook her head and said, "No, but I knew he was going to destroy them." And when they asked, "Why didn't you stop him?" she whispered, Because I didn't think he'd follow through. I thought it was just another script. Let that sink in. She thought it was a script. But it was real. It was always real. And the next bombshell was about to be detonated in court. Because Tracy wasn't done talking. And what she revealed about her final conversation with Michelle would send shockwaves through the case. What if the most incriminating piece of evidence wasn't hidden, but handed over willingly by the person you least expect? That's exactly what happened when investigators inserted the second USB drive. This one from Tracy Reiner. Yes, Tracy, the grieving daughter, the well-connected actress, the alleged accomplice. After days of stone-cold silence, she calmly slid the thumb drive across the interrogation table and said, "I want you to hear it from me before you find it on your own." Strange move, right? But Tracy understood one thing better than anyone in that room. Narrative. She'd lived it her whole life. Hollywood scripts, public perception, family myth-making. And now, she was playing for survival. But what was on that USB? It wasn't just one document. It was an archive. Emails, voice memos, screenshots, recordings of private family conversations. It was a backup of everything she claimed to have kept for protection. Protection from what? From being made the villain in a story I didn't write, she said. Let's dig in. File 01, meeting _with audio to MP3. This was a recording Tracy secretly made just 5 days before the murders. She and Michelle were sitting on the back patio. Birds chirping, distant traffic, wine glasses clinking. But their conversation? Anything but peaceful. Michelle, soft but firm. You need to stop covering for him, Tracy. It's not helping. It's enabling. Tracy, frustrated. You think I don't know that? But I'm not the one who keeps inviting him back into this house. Michelle, because he's my son. Tracy, and he's dangerous. Pause. Michelle, then help me. Help me do this right. I've already started the paperwork. Tracy, you're going to commit him? Michelle, it's that, or we wait for the headline. Silence. Tracy, he's going to feel betrayed. Michelle, he already does. End recording. That moment right there? Michelle had clearly made her decision, and Tracy knew. But what did she do with that knowledge? File after file on the USB began to paint a troubling picture. Tracy wasn't just a bystander. She was a bridge, the only person Nick still talked to, and she had been for years. File 02. Emails _Nick 2019-2025. Over 400 messages. Some cryptic, some emotional, some downright threatening. One chain stood out. Date, April 2nd, 2025, 19 days before the murders. From Nick. They're planning something. I can smell it. You know what they're capable of. Tracy replies. Calm down. Don't do anything stupid. Let me handle it. Nick. Like last time, when you said you'd make it go away, you didn't. And now they're making me disappear. Tracy, you're spiraling. We'll talk tomorrow. Nick. Tomorrow is too late. I don't need a sister anymore. I need a co-conspirator. That word, co-conspirator, raised every red flag. Investigators jumped. Tracy had just provided a breadcrumb trail straight into complicity. But then came file 03, lawyer _redacted. Subject line, regarding contingency plan, do not forward. The body of the email had been redacted in black bars, government style. Why? The original message, it turned out, had been encrypted and saved in a locked email archive Tracy accessed through a private legal firm. But even the metadata told a story. The sender? An associate at Chambers, Levy and Carter, a law firm known for crisis containment in high-profile scandals. The recipient? Tracy Reiner. The timestamp? 3 days before the murders. Investigators obtained a warrant. What they found in the unredacted email left jaws on the floor. The email read, Ms. Reiner, if your brother becomes a legal risk, you are to immediately activate Clause 7B. All communications must cease. Funds from the protection account will be wired to the Munich account as discussed. Do not respond to this email. Do not speak to the press. Clause 7B? What is that? Turns out, it was a pre-written escape plan. A legal firewall. If Nick ever did something catastrophic, Tracy had been advised to run. Germany, Munich. A secondary passport in her mother's maiden name. She didn't just panic book a flight. She had the exit strategy planned in advance. But she didn't run. She gave the USB instead, and she claimed that proved she wasn't involved. But did it? Because there was more. File 04. Tracy journal entries 2024. Digitized scans of her personal notes. Unlike Nick's journals, violent, obsessive, delusional, Tracy's were clear. But cold. Here's one excerpt. I'm tired of being the fixer. He spirals, I patch. He breaks, I clean. He threatens, I mediate. I've become complicit by proximity. But what else can I do? My father's blind. My mother's crumbling. They won't survive another scandal. Another. There's a part of me that wants him gone. Just gone. Not dead, but erased. Is that awful? Yes, Tracy. It kind of is. And here's the twist. Tracy had also hired a private investigator. Not to follow Nick, but to follow Rob. Why? What was she looking for? One memo from the PI states. Subject, Rob Reiner. Observed meeting with unknown woman, West Side office, 11:37 a.m. Tracy requested background check. No romantic behavior observed. Why was Tracy surveilling her own father? She later admitted, I thought he was cutting Nick out of the estate. I wanted to know before Nick found out. I was trying to stop the explosion before it happened. But that only raises more questions. Did she know the attack was coming? Was she delaying it, deflecting it, or directing it? Because with each file, it became clear. Tracy wasn't innocent. She was informed. And according to the prosecution, she was involved. Their case now hinged on one idea. That Tracy, through inaction and coded communication, facilitated the conditions that led to murder. Not by picking up a knife, but by opening the door. But what did Tracy say when confronted with that theory? Just one line. You think I opened the door? What if I was the one who tried to keep it shut and failed? That ambiguity? It would define the trial to come. Because Tracy's story was now out. The files were public. The media was circling like vultures. And then, another witness came forward. A man who hadn't been in the house for years. Who had once been silenced. Who now had nothing to lose. His name? Daniel. A former assistant. A former friend. And, according to new evidence, a man who once received a very large wire transfer from Tracy Reiner. But what he revealed next would make the entire courtroom gasp. What does it look like when Hollywood royalty falls? Not slowly. Not with fading relevance or forgotten roles. But violently, suddenly, dragged from the private lounges of first-class terminals into a screaming frenzy of press, flashing cameras, and cold steel cuffs. That was the moment Tracy Reiner stopped being a last name and became a headline. The arrest happened fast. A swarm of officers in plain clothes swept through Los Angeles International Airport just after 6:10 a.m. Terminal 4. Departure Gate 49B. A Lufthansa flight to Munich. First class. One way. No return ticket. Tracy was seated by the window, dark sunglasses covering puffy eyes, passport clutched in one hand, boarding pass in the other. She looked tired. Not panicked. Not even surprised. Just tired. Like she'd been waiting for this moment longer than anyone knew. When the officers approached, she didn't flinch. When they asked her to stand, she didn't argue. And when they read her rights, she nodded. She didn't speak a word. But one witness swears she whispered something as she stood. Goodbye, Dad. And just like that, Tracy Reiner, daughter of Rob Reiner, niece of Penny Marshall, descendant of Hollywood giants, was under arrest. The charges? Accessory after the fact to first-degree murder. Obstruction of justice. Conspiracy. It didn't take long for the headlines to explode. Reiner family implodes. Daughter arrested after parents' murder. Tracy Reiner booked as accomplice. Hollywood's darkest crime yet. The Reiner files. What did she know? Paparazzi swarmed the precinct. Reporters camped outside the courthouse. TV specials were cut together overnight using red carpet footage, family interviews, even clips from a league of their own. Talk show hosts speculated. Podcasters ranted. YouTube exploded. But behind those media theatrics, inside the interrogation room, the real drama was unfolding. Tracy sat across from lead detective Maria Gomez. No legal counsel yet. No official plea. Just silence. Then, finally, she leaned forward. I didn't kill my parents. Detective Gomez didn't blink. No one said you did. Tracy nodded. But I knew Nick might. That's why I came back. That was the first bombshell. She wasn't running to Germany. She was returning from New York. But she never told anyone she was coming back. Why? Because I didn't want anyone stopping me. I knew something was going to happen. and I wanted to see it before it did. See it? Or witness it. Detectives pushed further. Why didn't you warn them? Tracy's reply chilled the room. I tried. They wouldn't listen. They never did. They thought I was protecting him, but I was trying to delay him. That line echoed in every interrogation note, in every DA brief. Trying to delay him. But delay him from what? Murder? Or from telling the truth? Because there were two theories now. Tracy was a co-conspirator. She had communicated with Nick, coached him, then tried to run when the plan spiraled. Tracy was a reluctant gatekeeper, trapped between a ticking time bomb of a brother and a family too proud to take action until it was too late. But either way, she was in the fire now. Let's break it down. Timeline of her arrest. April 15th, 2025, 11:13 a.m. Tracy flies into LAX on a private carrier from JFK. No press. No handlers. She uses an alias booking, middle name only. April 16th, 2025, 2:38 p.m. Rob and Michelle Reiner are murdered. April 17th, 2025, 12:22 a.m. Tracy's outbound ticket to Munich is confirmed. One-way first class. April 17th, 2025, 6:10 a.m. Arrested before boarding. The DA argued this was classic flight behavior. Tracy's defense insisted it was fear. Who do you believe? Even Hollywood was split. Some rallied behind her. Alyssa Milano tweeted, Tracy Reiner has always been kind, professional, and ethical. I don't believe she's capable of what they're accusing her of. Hashtag Justice for Tracy. Others were less generous. One producer wrote anonymously to Deadline. She always acted like she was above it all. Now she's just like the rest of us. Caught. Her friends began distancing themselves. Former co-stars deleted posts. Agencies dropped her. The fall wasn't just public. It was total. By the time Tracy's mugshot hit the internet, memes were everywhere. A league of their own, and she lost it. From red carpet to red-handed. Hollywood's darkest daughter. And yet, through all this, Tracy stayed quiet. Until her arraignment. That morning, the courtroom was packed. Press badges. Studio execs in sunglasses. 3 Netflix producers, reportedly there just in case. Tracy entered in a beige jumpsuit. No makeup. Hair pulled back. Expression unreadable. The judge read the charges. Her attorney entered a plea of not guilty. Gasps rippled through the gallery. But the biggest shock came moments later. Tracy stepped to the microphone and, against her lawyer's advice, addressed the court. I love my parents. I tried to protect them. I failed. But I didn't help him kill them. That's not who I am. That's not what I do. But if loving my brother makes me guilty, then so be it. The room fell silent. The judge called a recess. Tracy's lawyer? Furious. The DA? Smirking. The public? Divided. What kind of woman says so be it to a murder charge? One who's given up? Or one who's ready to burn the whole thing down? Because behind that solemn courtroom speech, a legal war was already brewing. Prosecutors were gathering evidence. More messages. More money transfers. And testimony from someone unexpected. Remember Daniel? Tracy's former assistant? He had just come forward with a story. And not just any story. He claimed Tracy gave him instructions a week before the murders. Instructions to destroy a hard drive. Not Nick's. Hers. A backup copy of her own communications. Her own recordings. Daniel refused. Instead, he kept the drive. And when he heard about the murders, he turned it over. That was the moment Tracy's fall from grace became something else entirely. Now, prosecutors had her emails and her own voice, giving orders, discussing possible outcomes, preparing for damage control. Still think she didn't know what was coming? Because now, it looked like she did. And the worst part? One of the files, clearly time-stamped before the murders, was labeled, "If this goes too far, open later." A voice recording. Tracy's voice. Nick, if you're listening to this, that means you did something. I don't know how bad it is yet, but you can't say I didn't warn you. You've already dragged me in. And if you drag me down, too, just know, I have everything on you. Don't forget who paid for the lawyers. Don't forget who kept your secrets. You break the family. I break you. So what does that sound like to you? A desperate sister trying to stop a mental breakdown? Or a conspirator trying to cover her own tracks? The court hadn't decided yet. But the public? The court of public opinion had already hung the verdict. And the next hearing? would determine whether Tracy Reiner got bail or remained behind bars until trial. But what happened during that hearing would rock the courtroom to its foundation, because a new witness, someone no one saw coming, was about to testify, and their story would turn the entire case upside down. What happens when the child you're trying to save becomes the person you're most afraid of? That was the unspoken question hanging over the Reiner household for years. And the answer? It didn't come with rehab, or therapy, or love. It came with blood. But long before that horrifying Sunday afternoon in Brentwood, the spiral had already begun. Let's go back. Nick Reiner wasn't born broken. Far from it. He was the golden boy. Bright, curious, sensitive, a child who loved books, who could quote movies word for word, who once told his dad he wanted to write something that made people cry and think at the same time. But sensitivity, when left unprotected, can curdle, especially under the spotlight, especially when you're born into a dynasty. Nick never chose the stage, but it surrounded him. Playdates with other celebrity kids, paparazzi flashes, expectations that felt like lead weights on a child's shoulders. He wasn't a prodigy. He wasn't an actor. He didn't want to perform. He wanted space, stillness, an identity of his own. But in a family like the Reiners, there's little room for anonymity. So Nick disappeared, emotionally, before he ever physically did. At 13, he started skipping school. At 14, he was caught stealing alcohol from a set trailer. At 15, he had his first overdose. It was a cocktail of benzos and painkillers. Not enough to kill, but enough to terrify. Rob went public. He didn't hide it. He gave interviews about the opioid crisis. He cried on talk shows. He urged Congress to act. To the world, he was a brave father being open about addiction. But at home, Nick reportedly called those interviews performative bulls **T. He accused his father of using his pain to look heroic, of making himself the victim. Whether true or not, those accusations cut deep. Because by the time Nick turned 18, he had a record. Possession, assault, later dropped, trespassing, each charge sealed. Each situation handled quietly. Tracy tried to help. She checked him into rehab in Arizona. She flew out to visit. But according to leaked text messages found later, Nick saw her as fake, as a puppet for dad. He wrote in one message, "They don't want me better. They want me quiet." Let that sink in. Not healed, not healthy, just silent. It's the kind of statement that festers, that turns pain into rage. And rage finds a way to erupt. At 21, Nick vanished for 6 months. No contact, no sightings, no credit card usage. The Reiners reportedly hired private investigators. A family friend leaked that Rob was inconsolable. Michelle was said to be sleeping with the lights on. When Nick reappeared, it was at an ER in New Mexico. Starved, shaking, delirious. He claimed to have been living in the woods. No ID, no story, just scars. They took him back in. What else could they do? He was their son, but he wasn't the same. He stopped speaking at dinner. He would pace the hallways at night. He'd stare at walls for hours. One former housekeeper, speaking anonymously, said, "It was like something had taken root in him. Something angry. He was still Nick, but not really." And that's the most terrifying kind of transformation. The one you can't see clearly until it's too late. Rob built a guest house on the property for Nick to have space. But also, so the main house could be locked. Tracy stopped visiting. She said it was to give them time as a family. But privately, a friend claims she told them, "I can't look at him without feeling like something bad is going to happen." Still, the family soldiered on. Because when you're that famous, when the cameras are always watching, collapse has to be hidden. They showed up to charity events. They smiled at film festivals. They tweeted political outrage and support. All while, behind the gates of that Brentwood mansion, a storm kept building. And then came 2018. Nick was arrested outside a downtown bar after reportedly shoving a woman. Charges were dropped. No one talked about it. But something in him snapped after that. He started writing again. Hundreds of pages. Scattered journals. Typed manifestos. Dark fiction. Except some of it wasn't fiction. He wrote about a family with secrets. About a father who lied to the world. A mother who watched and did nothing. A sister who played nice and manipulated behind the scenes. They were stories. But they weren't. In one particularly chilling entry, later recovered during the investigation, he wrote, They think I'm their failure. I think they're my origin story. Another. I don't hate them. I just don't believe in their version of love anymore. What do you even do with writing like that? If you're Rob Reiner, apparently, you do what you've always done. You try to control the narrative. In early 2019, Rob began pushing a documentary about mental health. A passion project, he said. Inspired by family experience. But Nick was nowhere in the credits. Nowhere in the promos. Nowhere at the premiere. Because according to reports, he was banned from the theater. Michelle, reportedly, begged Rob not to provoke him. But Rob believed in exposure. In sunlight. In storytelling. He just didn't realize. Nick had his own story to tell. And it wasn't going to be shared on a screen. It would be told in blood. Because just a year later, everything cracked. One night, a neighbor reported hearing glass shatter. Then yelling. Then silence. No one called the cops. Why would they? It's Brentwood. It's the Reiners. 2 weeks later, Michelle canceled a major charity event. No explanation.